Okay, so even though, welcome back everyone to our second meeting. And we met last week. So I guess we should take attendance, even though I see that everyone's here. So I'm just going to run through everyone's name and just say here, please. John Goodwin.
Here.
Art Cassavant.
Here.
Kristen Nielsen.
Here.
Peggy Daneman.
Here.
Todd Hobbs.
Here.
Kevin Moynihan.
Here.
And Lynbrook Sovny. That's me. I'm here. And as a follow-up to a suggestion at last week's meeting, I've invited Steve Kleppen tonight. He was the former town planner in New Canaan. Most of you probably know him already. He's now the director of planning for the city of Norwalk. And he has offered to join us. And I thought that he could be helpful providing a historical perspective on affordable housing in New Canaan. And because he was here for the a large tenure, was it 11 or 12 years, Steve? And he was here when we drafted the last plan in May of 2011, the housing opportunities study that we're using as our guide. And tonight, after that, I also wanted to focus on crafting a vision statement and also looking at strategies to move us forward for the next 5 years, since this plan focuses on a 5-year time period. I wanted to thank you guys, Peggy, Krista, and Scott, for spending time to offer comments from last week. Thank you very much. Krista and Peggy, you both had very detailed comments. I forwarded them out to everyone, so you all should have them as a group, so you can look at them tonight. So as not to waste Steve's time, I just wanted to does anyone have any questions right off, or any comments, or any?
Well, Lynn, can I sort of outline a bit for Steve, if it's okay for everybody, and sort of outline some comments?
Sure.
You know, as Lynn says, you know, we got to deal with the crux of what we got to get done at the end of the month, but I was sort of a person who was talking to Lynn about having Steve on, and you know, my reasons for this is over the years that I worked with Steve, he had a lot of ideas on affordable initiatives and also ideas as to specific areas where we should look at. And I know, you know, there's some concern maybe we don't point out specific areas, but I think we should, to tell you the truth. So Steve has some institutional memory of where we have come from in terms of looking at affordable initiatives. And so I think history there would be one, and then two is you know, I'd recommend Steve talk about, you know, some specific projects or areas or initiatives that he talked about and considered over the years. And then obviously now sitting in Norwalk, it's a different community, but maybe there are some ideas that Steve is working on in Norwalk that we should be thinking about. And then, you know, the last item is more overview wise. I just thought is, here's somebody who knows the town very, very well, but is, you know, now a non-town person. So for a number of years now, he has not been in the weeds that we have been in. And so I thought sort of, you know, that knowledgeable but once removed view could be helpful as well.
So I don't know if it was my connection or somebody else's connection, but there was a lot of frozen faces, and I heard Lynn kind of cut out at the beginning, and I kind of picked back up when John was speaking. So I think I got sort of the gist of some of what you were asking. So I'm happy to fire away with whatever you'd like me to chat about. I think from a historical perspective, I don't remember the date, but I think it was around the mid-2000s. The state had come out with a program that was modeled after something Massachusetts had done to incentivize communities to add affordable housing, where they would, they paid for funding to do the study. And then by every unit created, they would give you a certain dollar amount. And it was, I can't remember what the figures were. And so we took money to do the planning grant, which was the housing study that was done. It was decided during that study that it was in the town's best interest not to pursue the next phase of seeking the funding for the units created, because there were a lot of strings attached to that. So we decided to just kind of chart our own path. And at the same time, the housing bubble hit shortly thereafter. And then I think the program funding for the bonuses for creating the units dried up. I'm not sure how much funding actually was ever available on that part of it. So we, focused our efforts on, working with the housing authority on projects like Millport. And I forgot the name of the property on the corner that's under construction now, but that was another property that we thought was a great opportunity, just based on how the site was so large and really was underutilized in terms of the potential density and the potential ability to also annex properties in proximity or that could abut it. So that was one of the other focus areas. And there, I think there were 2 or 3 other properties that were looked at that, were potential sites down the road that, the town was interested in acquiring. And I think it also touched on some other programs and options to add affordable housing. And I think that was around the same time that the idea, and I know former Chairman Papp was heavily involved with the Inclusionary Zoning Fund. So that's kind of was like the impetus for those kind of 2 fronts.
Steve, I have a question. Was it for incentive housing that it was decided there were too many strings attached from the state?
Yes, and I can't remember the exact program that they offered that was part of that, but it's referenced in that plan. I think that it's included.
Yes, I think it was called the Incentive Housing Zone Program.
Yeah. And I don't think I'd have to go back and do some research, but I don't think there was a lot of money doled out for the actual construction of units statewide.
Yeah, I've looked online at the data. The state still has a website where you can go and see, people have submitted what they've done, but it's pretty sparse. And like you said, I think it might not even be operational anymore.
Steve,
John, do you have anything else I want? Go ahead.
Yeah, from your perspective, how should we be thinking about this?
So I'm assuming this is in response to the state's kind of mandated affordable housing plan. I think that's where you're going.
Yeah.
So
Steve,
I can kind of,
Steve, this is Art. I just say we've broken it into a couple of pieces. One is, how do we respond to 830G? Second, how do we deal with sort of the impending combination of fair housing and land use? And 3, what are the best strategies so that we deal with affordable housing generically, as well as response to 830G?
yeah, so there's a lot going on all of those fronts all at the same time. So I can tell you, like in Norwalk, we started working on our own in-house affordable housing plan. And then we also contemplated just using the Westcog plan and say that's our plan, but we didn't think either avenue was the best avenue and had a lot of concerns because the full download of all the census data hasn't really happened yet. So we don't know what, and there's also some questions about the reliability of some of that census data as well. And at the same time, the state has put together a committee to kind of look at a lot of the land use practices throughout the state. And then one of the fronts that they're working on is coming up with model affordable housing regulations. So really what should go into an affordable housing plan that a community acts. And that group is just starting their work now. So there, that could be a 12 to 18-month process. So we've kind of questioned whether it even makes sense for us to do a plan at this point if the state's going to come out with guidance a year from now that says your plan should include X, Y, and Z, and we haven't even thought about those things. So our position is we're going to not worry about complying. Well, I shouldn't say not worrying about, but we're not going to focus on a deadline to have a plan done. We're going to put out an RFP to have a consultant assist us with some main points. We did a lot of the background work, which I'm pretty comfortable with what we put together. But at the same time, the questions that we're really asking is, obviously it's a much different community, is what does Norwalk really need from an affordable housing standpoint to hit all the different kind of demographics and categories that could go into that plan. And at the same time, help with the public outreach component to it as well. So we want to have somebody kind of work with us on those fronts. So we'll put the RFP out, and then we'll keep a contingency from the funds we've got allotted. So that way, if there is information that the state's affordable housing plan wants us to include, that we can circle back and then address that as part of the study. So that's kind of how we're approaching that.
Steve, where does Norwalk fit now in the 830G measure?
So we're about 13.25%.
Yeah, so you don't have any threat from 830G encroachment now?
No, we comply, and we've had inclusionary regulations on the books for a long time. We revamped them pretty recently, and we've got our affordability levels are probably lower than what like our peer communities are, just based on the reality of the cost of living in Fairfield County is just so astronomical. Even at 80% of AMI is really kind of a huge number. Even for most people, it's a huge number. So that we've targeted everything on our ends based off SMI, and then we're trying to get down to like 60% of SMI. But we don't do it as just as a stick. We also use a carrot approach where we'll drop our parking requirement down to like 1 space per unit. And then we also took the New Canaan model where we say, all right, if you give us the units at 80% of SMI, we also want an inclusionary zoning fee along with that. So we kind of said, all right, you can give us the 60% SMI and we'll give you a break on parking and so forth. But if you do the 80%, we're going to ask for a fee as well.
Dave, how do you think about, I mean, one of the things we're grappling with is, and Art referred to this, is, how do we think about affordable housing? And I think we as a committee have agreed that, clearly it's the 830G type definition, but it's also workforce housing and it's also senior housing. And in your view, how should we think about all that?
So that's a really hard question, just because our inclusionary zoning is really, it's called workforce housing. So it's really targeted at the, the police, fire, teachers, and those folks. This is my own personal opinion. I don't think like planning and zoning's responsibility is to solve all the affordable housing issues within a community, just because, and particularly like a community like Norwalk, you're talking about some, little or no income for some individuals. So I don't know if you necessarily solve that through zoning, but I think that's a broader community discussion with a lot of different groups and other programs, and it could involve the state and the federal government as well. So I think there's a lot of layers to that. So it's what's permissible statutorily that you can ask for as part of your inclusionary regulations, and then what other target groups are you looking at, and who's the best agency, or how best to structure those kind of regulations and those kind of housing types.
Steve, is Norwalk doing any development on your own, or are you relying on private developers?
Our housing authority is actually ramping up a lot of different projects now. They did. I don't know if how familiar you are with South Norwalk, but there was a property, Washington Village, which was one of the oldest affordable housing sites in the state. We actually got a very big grant a few years ago to redo that. And all those units got taken down and a new unit, new development was put up. And the model under that unit really was hitting those really low affordability levels hitting our workforce requirement, and then market rate. So it was kind of a partnership between, so the idea is the market rate units offset the lower income units. So that was a really, and I think it's been really successful. I mean, obviously the people that were in the units had a little bit of disruption because they lost a little bit of sense of place and a little sense of their neighborhood. But in the end, they're in, those units used to flood. These units are brand new. They're all flood compliant. And they're all our units, when you do inclusionary, have to be the exact same as the market rate units. You can't put in different appliances. You can't use different fixtures or countertops. They all have to look like the exact same unit. So that's been very successful. The Housing Authority is following a similar model on another project in town. And I know they're actively looking at different engagements. And there are some, I'm more on the private side, affordable housing developers that are starting to, do some other projects as well.
Steve, remind me, but the Washington Place rehab, as I recall, was tax credit driven and income averaging based to get the credits?
I believe so. And that was also a Choice Neighborhoods grant that was granted. So it was a big sum of money.
Do you guys spend any time focusing on the QAP definitions, or you just see what the marketplace will drive?
I might not be the best person to ask that question to. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
So Steve, in a community like ours, the problem is we just don't have a lot of spots for high density development. And so any places where we do high density, thanks to the threat of 830G, you almost have to play to the 830G and really go ahead and maximize the number of points in order to try to get moratoriums, which makes it even more difficult to do like mixed use developments. Whereas like in Norwalk, you're exempt from 830G. So your mixed use developments are great. But I mean, do you have any thoughts as to how to get around that? Or again, how do you maximize your 830G while actually trying to make a variety of housing stuff?
The problem with all of the communities we're talking about is that there's not much land left. So everybody, Norwalk's similar percent built out as New Canaan is. There's just not much land. So everything is a redevelopment site. There's not virgin land out there. It's easier to build from. So I think there's been tons of studies looking at, all your parking lots that are probably, for environmental reasons alone, or probably should be redeveloped into something better than they are. And given their location, it'd be easy if, for me, if thinking about like the lumberyard lot or something like that, that's found land, you already own it. So you could, put in, we're doing something similar. If you know where the Webster Street lot is in downtown, it's right by, just off of Washington Street. It's a massive surface parking lot. It's just kind of a bad space in the middle of our downtown. So we put out an RFP for folks to come in with a plan to redevelop that. And the idea behind that is we wanted a certain amount of affordable housing, a certain amount of commercial space, amount of office space, amount of parking spaces we wanted back. So that could be an approach you take with something like the lumberyard lot, where you lay out here are the things that we want in return for this property, where we want to have X number of commuter parking spaces. We want X number of residential units, whether they're senior housing or whatever it is, and it's got to include 20% of the units have to be affordable at this threshold or that threshold. So you could spell out the criteria you want in that project, and then have people solicit proposals, and they're going to, run the numbers and tell you, in order to build that, we're going to need to build an X million square feet of development or whatever the numbers work out to.
Do you ever look at incentives or incentivizing private developers to include affordable or a higher ratio of affordable in their developments?
So we're in the process of completely gutting our zoning regulations. So that's something we've talked about. They have had on the books, and I can't remember if it's the 1990s or 1980s when they put our inclusionary zoning regs in, but no one ever took advantage of the bonus provisions. And it might have been just because it wasn't worded well. It could be something as simple as that. I know a lot of communities do that with different levels of success.
Anything you guys have done that you would, if you had to do over again, you'd modify?
You know, not so much recently. I think with our workforce regs, it started out, oddly enough, it wasn't broadcast across the whole city. It was just in certain sections of the city where it ended up almost being, I'd say, bad policy because it was concentrating all the affordable units in one spot. So now we've kind of made it, if you're doing any multifamily, which we define as 3 or more, you have to either give us, so if you're between 3 units and 10 units, you can give us a unit or you can give us a fee. If you're above 10, you've got to give us a unit, plus you can do the fee on the fractional piece. And I think we've tried to make it at least equitable and not so burdensome that, you know, people are balking at. And I think most of the developers we deal with understand the need. I mean, I was just reading an article over the weekend about the, 4 million units nationwide. That's just a shortfall of housing, which is driving, the rents in some areas are going up 30-40%, just based on demand alone. So I think, I mean, I'm open to any suggestion, but I think what we're doing seems to make sense to me at least.
What do you charge per unit? I mean, what's that fractional amount?
We use the same formula as you guys use. And so the reason they said, where'd you come up with the formula? I said, that's what we did in New Canaan. That seemed to suffice. So it's what's it, 10 per thousand for residential construction costs. We don't do the commercial aspect, but I think my commission wants to look at the commercial part of it too. So we might tweak that part as well.
And Steve, do you have, as you have more and more units that sort of end up in various places, does the housing authority control all of those units or report on them? Or does each individual developer have to do their own reporting or certifications?
Yeah, so our office, so we have a senior planner that's like one of her roles is the housing planner. And so she monitors that program and gets all the compliance reports. And we've actually put a web page up on our page about affordable housing and how you can apply and where the workforce units are, have all the contact information, and also the other programs that are available, whether it's through the housing authority or other means. I think that's been a help to some folks as well.
Steve, can I ask a question about actual building? Have you seen any development of low-income eligible housing that has not been credit-based?
No, because I know the only other project that's got a high percentage of affordable housing was credit-based. Now, some of I mentioned we're looking at redeveloping that Webster Street lot. I don't know if that would come in with tax credits or not.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how they would do it. I think a lot of that depends on how much density we give them. So it could offset it.
For workforce housing, is there any way, how do you guys constrain rents? Once you get away from an affordable housing model, I mean, are you able to go up to 100 and 100, 120, 130% of AMI in order to restrict who's allowed to live there?
Right. So we monitor we get reports and the income verification on each tenant. Annually, they have to provide all that, the required information. It's the pay stubs and all that information, so we can verify that. And then we do allow them to exceed, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, so if you were eligible, you met all the eligibility requirements for a workforce unit, and then hopefully you got a big promotion at work, and then you exceeded the income thresholds. We do have an allowance to exceed that. so we don't, necessarily kick somebody out just because they're making more money, because that, that's. kind of-
I was actually asking under the fact, like, if we created workforce housing in New Canaan for, say, our cops and our firemen and our teachers, their income level might very well start out at 85, 90, $100,000, which would mean they wouldn't actually qualify for, 80% housing or 60% housing. They might have qualified for 100%, which I'm not sure if that qualifies as affordable. And I mean, are you able to go ahead and restrict it at levels that are above normal affordable levels?
I think there's an allowance that counts towards 830G. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. We don't allow that here. You've got to, when you're, like I said, when you're applying for a unit, you've got to meet those income thresholds.
Yeah, I can answer that, Scott, because you can do something called income averaging, which allows you to do it for a measured group of units as long as you have compliance overall at the different levels. The problem is it's really hard to monitor. And to Steve's point, it's almost impossible to get somebody out once they're in.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll just tack on, I'm pretty sure that Greenwich, I know Greenwich has a workforce housing program that does offer housing for income levels above 80%. I don't know how that works in reality, because as we all know, there's no subsidy offered for income levels above 80%.
When you talk about senior housing, are you talking about senior housing or sort of aging in place housing? I mean,
That runs the gambit for sure. I mean, that could run a whole slew of directions, because you can have the accessory dwelling unit conversation, which is meant to, make that more palatable and more reasonable. And then you could have, and I'm not an expert on, senior housing developments, but a lot of that market seems to have dried up from where it was a few years ago. I don't know, Scott probably had more detail on that than I had. I know that seemed to be more hot a few years ago, where they were looking at kind of those, like the Waveney model, where you start out and you're completely independent, then you need a certain level of service as you age, and then you become wholly dependent. But I don't know what the model is for that right now. So yeah, I'm not positive.
Steve, it's now that you've had the experience of being in New Canaan around 20,000 and Norwalk around 90. I find that the issues facing each of the communities to be very different. I mean, do you have an opinion as to, how much aligned we are as Norwalk and New Canaan, how much we just have different circumstances, what those are, how to align those together in a state or regional way?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think obviously the affordable housing challenges in Norwalk are a lot greater. Just any city is going to face more of those, just based on the wide range of the income levels that are in need of assistance. So, like I said, you're talking where have units where are nearly fully subsidized in some fashion. So I think that level, you have to deal with homelessness. I think is a much broader issue in a city versus a small town. But I mean, as Norwalk's downtown and like South Norwalk has started to really boom in terms of the desirability to want to live down there, because we see a lot of people from all the communities that downsize and they want to be in a more walkable and sometimes urban environment where they can go to restaurants and shops. And the same thing why New Canaan's downtown is popular. People like that, ability to go down and walk and enjoy the nice amenities and be closer to the shopping and so forth. So those are, as we've gotten more successful in our development, that's also led to increased prices in housing. So our rental affordability has actually gotten a lot higher than it was several years ago. We were talking about that in one of our staff meetings today about, I have some younger staff who rents in Stanford, but they said the housing stock in Norwalk is newer for the multifamily than Stanford, so it's actually more expensive in times just because it's a newer product. So that we're getting those same kind of challenges as the, you know, post-COVID, the influx from out-of-staters that came into Fairfield County and other parts of Connecticut drove up housing prices for everybody. So just the overall affordability level for anyone has just gotten, you know, higher and higher, and the bar just gets higher and higher. So I don't know if there's, it's a problem everybody faces. So I mean, you know, looking at like some of the things the state's pushing on some of the housing bills, you can see what the direction they want people to go. So it's our, you got to, you know, move along those fronts.
Has there been any developed opinion about the accessory dwelling unit view from Norwalk?
Yeah, I think we're going to end up opting out just for a couple basic reasons, just because if we don't opt out, we're beholden to what they tell us to do. So I think that's kind of a concern. And the second part is the allowing an accessory unit to be just as tall as a single family house when it's, you know, a couple feet off the property line, I think will be quite unsettling to some of our like established single family neighborhoods. So I think we'll adopt something pretty close to what they're asking for, but just with something with a little less blunt impact on folks.
Thank you.
Guys, should we let Steve go then? Anything else for Steve? Okay, well, Steve is the guy who dragged you into this. Thank you very much. I know you had a long day.
No problem.
Buy you a beer sometime.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Steve.
Okay. So that sort of leads us into our conversation of the next, well, we have to come up with a vision statement and our strategies. Perhaps we should, after having our conversation with Steve, maybe we want to talk about some strategies first and then look at a vision statement. Is that so? One of my takeaways from the conversation with Steve just now is that, and he just said it at the end, was that Norwalk is also having an affordable housing problem and a housing problem as well. So it's across Fairfield County, and it's probably even bigger than that across the nation, as he noted. So we're not in a unique position with respect to having a small stock of affordable units. And I think, you know, some of the strategies we used last time and some of the strategies that were identified last week and some of the strategies that Steve just identified are some of the same strategies multiple communities are going to be using. I also took away from Steve's conversation, one of the things we said last week is that we really need to have a database and an inventory system of all of our affordable units. And Steve noted, one of you asked the question, and Steve noted that they actually have a planner that tracks everything, and it's, you know, it's continual. So, you know, moving forward, that should definitely be part of our strategy, especially if we want to continue having an 830G moratorium and continually apply, so we can always know where our stock is. I think I want to say it was Art that sort of honed in on this point last week. I guess my other takeaway from Steve's conversation was that they're identifying sites that are town owned, and he talked about a parking lot that they owned that they're looking to partner with a developer. And one of the things that we mentioned last week is inventorying and identifying some of our own town sites that might or privately owned sites that might be possible for us to either acquire or utilize to construct affordable housing. I don't know if that's still one of the ways we want to go. And then one of the takeaways of from last week's meeting was that we should look for new ways for the town and for the housing authority to sort of partner together at times, and also to find private developers to partner with. I don't know if that's still feasible. And then I think what are some of my other takeaways. And I guess my other takeaway is that Steve mentioned that Norwalk had affordable housing. It's been on the books for quite a while, but some of the things, one of the things that he noted was that the bonus options weren't really utilized, which is kind of interesting for a city, and especially when you're increasing density. But they're constantly revamping their zoning regulations for inclusivity. So that's probably another key focus that we need to have, is to fine tune ours.
So I'm going to just add 3 points that I'd take away from what Steve said, and I wouldn't have
Okay.
said these while Steve's on the phone.
Okay.
Right? The Washington Village site was an extraordinary mess that was in violation of safe housing and
Okay.
fair housing for a variety of reasons. They did get 9% credits for that deal. It priced at over $1.20. I know because I looked at them in my work capacity. The project had an enormous, I'm going to say roughly $40 million, and that's a $40 million backup contribution from the town of Norwalk, because they had to, and they had to avoid a situation like Father Panic Village in Bridgeport. Second key thing to take away is they're at 13% relative to 830G. So they're not subject to any 830G application and won't be. So as we think about our own town responses, we need to recognize that that's a very different situation, right? I mean, as we sit here, the third takeaway, which I thought was extremely important for us, is that they don't view accessory dwelling as a useful tool for all of the reasons that we actually talked about last week. And, you know, as we think about what we want to do as a town, right, we have to, you know, be cognizant of those issues. And they are not using income averaging, which is extremely interesting, because income averaging, which is a pretty technical way of doing this, provides you the ability to try to do, for example, senior housing and other income housing levels, but it is really tough to administer and nobody ever moves out. And the fact that they've got the allowance built on top of it tells you that they've given up on trying to get anybody to move out.
Hey, Art, sorry to interrupt. Lynn, Krista dropped. She's in the waiting room. Can you let her in again, please?
Sorry, thank
Sorry,
you.
Art.
Oh, no, that's it. And that was all I had. So.
Sorry about that.
And the final point, of course, is that they're thinking about the Westcog application. But if you guys read through that Westcog application, which I did with some care, my takeaway on the Westcog application was it was a really well-written collection of a whole bunch of reports, but there was no strategy embedded in that I could find anywhere for what either the region needs to do, or more specifically, what we need to do as a group. So providing input to that is probably useful, but particularly the absence of Fairfield in that, apparently, or at least as I read it, Fairfield was not in it. And the fact that there wasn't any proscribed strategy says that it'll probably get filed up there in Hartford. And there was one error too, on page 119 or whatever it was, in the reference index for affordable housing, there is no reference to any of our 4 housing units that are theoretically available. And I mean, and I'm not sure if we want to add that, but if we're going to bother to participate in the Westcog output, we should at least have our 4 projects or the 3 completed listed in the inventory, so people don't say, oh yeah, you participated in this, but you don't actually have any housing, which would just be factually incorrect.
Art, I totally commend you in that I speed read it, and that took a lot of my weekend. So congratulations on actually getting to that level of detail. Thank you.
With no good basketball teams in the NCAA, what are we going to do?
I mean, I found the Westcog thing to be very interesting, not very practical. I mean, just tons and tons of info. And unfortunately, as soon as you get into like numbers and number parsing, I mean, you can divvy up statistics however you want to divvy them up. I think it would be, again, as part of this group, you know, as Steve brought up, you hate the fact that the state's going through right now and creating a plan to tell us whether or not our plans are right or wrong. And you're like, thanks, guys, we appreciate the effort here. So in a way, it's like, you just kind of join in under something and you start the progress going forward as something constructive, and then you do something more constructive later on as more rules come out, or I don't feel strongly either way.
As a newcomer to this process that you all have been doing for many more years than I, but you know, I kind of look at this 830G, and the size of the developments is what is, you know, is just alarming, and we're having to deal with that every time it comes in. Somebody called it a cudgel last week, I believe. I sort of look at it as an artist would a big piece of rock. We have a chisel and a hammer, and we come up with something that looks like we planned it to happen, or we come up with a sledgehammer or a bazooka and blow the top off, and that's 830G. And I think, you know, we have to look at a way that we can grow the number of affordable units without incurring the massive numbers that 830G engenders, you know, when it goes into enforcement. And so if there's a way of, on a smaller scale, looking at moving forward, you know, with 5, 10, 20 units, you know, maybe increasing something in more of a scale unit. I think they talk, you know, like what they call it, middle-size housing, the incentive zoning, I think that we dismissed. It may be time to look at it again, to see whether, you know, you can take an acre and put 10, 15 units of row houses on it that are more in keeping with the scale of the neighborhood and not something else. So I think we need to kind of revisit some of those strategies to be able to take smaller chunks out. Because if we can do that and half of them are affordable, we're already halfway where we might be with an 830G type of development, where the denominator keeps getting bigger and the numerator never gets quite big enough. So.
Peggy, this is Krista. Just to clarify, the revisions we made to the zoning regulations last fall, which we called inclusionary zoning under section 7.6, do to a certain extent what you're talking about. They require all new multifamily projects with more than 5 units to include a certain percentage of them as affordable units. So we will in time start to see affordable units on a smaller scale dispersed in the community, in the multifamily housing that we get built here. I think that's still not exactly what you're talking about, but I just wanted to point out that we have taken a step in that direction.
But you know, I understand that. I'm wondering about taking it down to any multifamily, and encouraging, maybe incenting multifamily in areas where it's appropriate, where you've got water and sewer and lot size, so that we either get a fee in lieu or you get an affordable unit or multiple affordable units. I was talking to a friend who's a commercial developer, and he was saying, so, well, you know, rents in commercial properties are often designated by or actually property taxes are designated by the rental that you might assume to get on that property. And it's adjusted in residential and commercial real estate, in big projects. And he said, you know, what about looking at something like that, you know, kind of a model like that? And you know, you wonder whether that kind of abatement for affordable units might be attractive to a developer that could, you know, could help them with other developments that are in for-profit areas. Just, I mean, it would be town of finance, it would be the finance people have to look at it, but it might be something that would incent people to add affordable units in the inclusionary, you know, to include those in their developments.
Has P&Z actually talked with a couple of developers and gone over the math as to what, you know, how do you hit that equilibrium where you actually, something will happen? Because I mean, if the math doesn't work, then we've just outlawed
Right.
development, and then we aren't going to get anything. and I'm not sure who the right guys are. I mean, Viking or used to be another developer in town who would be happy to do that, but I don't think we can be consulting him at this point. And, you know, there's some others though, but I mean, have we talked to anyone as to how that math works?
This is Krista. I mean, all I can say, I'm sure someone else here may know more than I do, but you know, since passing the inclusionary zoning regulations back in October, or maybe at around the same time as passing them, we had a pre-application for one project over on Pine Street and a second pre-application over on Burtis, both doing the 15% affordable as required by the regulations. Taking advantage, perhaps too much advantage, but taking advantage of the density bonuses, the height bonuses that we said were an option to consider. And I mean, I haven't heard from either of them that this was a unmanageable, untenable situation. They seem to be able to make it work, and some of them seem to want to make it work.
And where are we right now? What's our dollars or our numbers? Sorry, what do
What do you
people,
mean?
15, it's 15% of whatever the number of units is, they have to put in as affordable?
Correct.
Yes.
Well, it's a good thing we did the revision that we did last year, but to answer your question, Scott, if you go to Viking, for example, who I've done a lot of business with over the years on multiple projects, the only time you're going to get a project that's going to do more than the 10 or 15 is when there are credits involved. And the math just doesn't work. But if somebody can get the trade-offs that we allowed, then you'll get 10%. And you weren't on the drafting of that, but our key principle there was under no circumstances should any newly constructed project do harm to the overall compliance ratio, right? So the idea was whatever we do, make sure that nothing new causes it to be worse, right? But the trade-off to get a significant nut, because we're at 3% reported now, but to get us to a real improvement against the 10 is we're going to have a high density, high impact project.
And Burtis Street is 40 units, is that right? Or those 6 affordable?
It was 26, I believe, and at their last pre-application meeting that they presented.
And so they had 4 or 5.
4 is what they presented as affordable.
I mean, the hassle under all of those is just, again, it's boy, you got to do a lot of those to make a dent. Although, again, they add up over time. How about, I mean, anyone have a feel as to, I mean, what would be the, and again, I think even 6 months ago, the town's appetite for subsidizing something would be pretty slim. But today that attitude is at least more open-minded. You know, cutting toward Peggy's idea, like if you allow somebody to do a duplex, and again, I'm not sure who would, you know, I guess if they couldn't do a duplex before and we allowed them to do a du or a triplex, and they deeded one of those units under affordable, I mean, would the town subsidize any of that? Are we willing to get into that? I mean, even proposing or thinking about that? Because I mean, if you could get a
Scott,
unit,
are you talking about through using the housing trust fund or using general fund?
I'm talking probably general funds, because if you, I mean, the housing trust funds, if you're going to throw in, I'm totally spitballing here, but you know, if I'm going to go ahead and take my house and make a duplex, and I'm going to get rental income of $1,200 a month as opposed to $2,000 a month, I've got to get something real serious in order to make it worth my while. And so you're talking, you know, probably $100,000 or something, or $200,000 in order to maybe deed that in. And if you did that, you know, the affordable housing, the trust fund is going to go away quickly. I mean, really quickly for very little impact. So I imagine it'd be general funds. Maybe it's a mix of the two. And again, I'm just throwing this out. This is the first idea, which is typically a bad one. Hopefully someone can think of some way to make it into something worthwhile.
I mean, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think that, you know, we have to kind of assess what the appetite of the town is for financing something like that. And to your point of maybe it's a blended source of funding, both general fund and housing trust funds. I mean, I think something we should consider, at least in this planning process, is are there additional revenue streams? I mean, for the housing trust fund, we obviously have the building permit fee, but are there other fees, other places that we could, you know, assess fees and collect money into this housing trust fund so that we can grow it faster and bigger for these types of things?
As you know, looking at the the revised, the inclusionary zoning, I'm wondering like, what incentive, if you're a relatively small builder, would you have to go 5 units or more? So it's like, as long as I don't go over 4, I'm good. I don't have to put any affordable in, but it'd be nice to be able to, be able to have something going in for 4 and under, to the housing trust
mean,
fund.
Everything we were told, Peggy, was that under 5 units and probably even under 10 units, it's a pretty big ask to have someone be putting in affordable units. Like the math just doesn't pencil out on those projects. So that's why we had to start at a certain threshold. But to your point, any market rate units still have to pay into our affordable housing trust fund. So
Right.
whether or not they include the inclusionary zone, the inclusionary units, the market rate units all pay in.
But if there were another way to incentivize developers to include, like Scott was saying, 1 unit out of 3, that could be affordable, whether it's a tax, property tax rebate or property tax credit, not like, Art is done for big developments, but for an individual basis on the grand list, that might be a possibility. So, I'm just brainstorming here, trying to figure out how to chip away at this rock to get those through. So.
Well,
I'd also say that we ought to consider under the fact of whether or not the town should actually actively contribute into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund some amount every single year. Because fees are all a great idea, but they just cause distortions and a pain in the neck everywhere. And then everyone says, oh, affordable housing's free because somebody else is paying for it and we hit it. But if we're serious about it, should the town be putting aside $500,000, $1 million a year every year into it? And therefore, every 4-year cycle, you've got, $4 million, $5 million, which actually gives you a shot at possibly trying to acquire some land.
That's the other thing, Scott, that I was thinking about earlier today, that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as written, I believe under state statute, is for rehabilitation and construction. I don't know that we can use, and you would know better than I would actually, if we can use the money for acquisition. And I don't know that we can use the money for administration. And those are 2 sort of weak spots that I think that we need to figure out how to fill.
It's possible that we used our developer fee from Millport 1 to acquire the land next door in order to do Millport 2. But I believe, there was a lot of commingling of funds. So, and no matter what, we need to make it for acquisition. That has to be.
Right. Well, so my
Remember-
point is, if the town is contributing through the general fund, then we kind of escape the loopholes, the way our hands are tied by state statute for the housing trust fund.
Okay.
There were several aspects of Millport Phase 1 and Millport Phase 2 that are really important. We had free land because, and this is true at Canaan Parish, we had free land because of the existing HUD projects, fundamentally free. In the case of Millport Phase 1, we did off-site constructed pull-in units, which were really inexpensive. Phase 2, we went to stick-built, and then Canaan Parish, we've really gone full bore. But in all cases, we had 2 tools: credits and subsidy via project vouchers or tenant vouchers. Okay. This is a town-wide issue, right? If in fact the town is willing to build or contribute to affordable housing, you're talking about a very substantial amount of money to recreate either credit value or voucher value. It's an enormous sum of money. And that's why, as we develop our vision for this, we need, I believe, to state that our vision is to use every possible tool in our toolkit to come up with a set of approaches to make housing more affordable in our community. But the question of paying for it is going to require the first step that we did last year, which was how do we make it, some of it get built naturally, which will probably be 12% or 15%, and then B, make sure that we as a town encourage developers to try to get credits to do units. The problem with the 1 and 2s is that our gap is so big, even after Canaan Parish comes into play, that we will still be subject to 830G applications for a long time to come.
But Art, what about, I mean, going to the land contribution aspect of it? I mean, how far does that get you?
Typically, land is 25% of the cost structure at least. And the reason unit sizes in these projects are always somewhere between 35 and 50 is because to overcome engineering costs, shared construction costs, sewer connection costs, and everything else, you need a bunch of units, and then you build very standard housing. And without those components, you don't get over the fixed cost structure.
Right.
But as we move out of this commission, right, we need to participate in Westcog, but we also need to start to measure accurately what we have all the time and be constantly looking for a way to get closer to 10.
Is it what, we have to have 2% every 4 years? Is that it? So an increase of
2%.
around 2% to sort of keep the,
2% every 4 years. If we want to apply for a moratorium, it's 2% of the number from the census that was last accepted. So right now it's the 2010 census, but as soon as the US Congress accepts the 2020 number, it'll be the 2020 number, which is going to shave off a point or two for us because it reduces the number from the 2010 census. So it would be to our benefit to make use of that number over the next 10 years until they record the 2030 census, because we don't know what that number is going to be.
it's like 150 units or so, I think.
The points, it comes out to about 150 Hue points when you use the 2020 number, and it's like 151.2 when you use the 2010 number.
Yeah.
Which translates to nominally 70 units at around 60%,
Mhm.
Yes, somewhere in that range, yes.
nominally.
That's assuming they don't make any changes to 830G.
Or the mandates from the state, right? So,
Are we allowed to put inside of our vision statement on this, how we really favor local control and being able to decide our own fate? And actively pushing for that? Or does that just draw attention to us and make us feel good for a minute, but just draws unwanted attention?
So we could put whatever we want. I could actually, I think I saved it. Krista had suggested that we start with a vision statement that's in the 2014 POCD. So I can actually share it. And of course I wrote it really teeny, so sorry about that. Can you guys see it, or do I need to?
It's good.
Okay, so that's straight out of the 2014 POCD, and that was, Krista suggested we use that as our base. We can edit it. We can add in that we think local control is the ideal. We could take none of it.
Well, then Scott, to your point, I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I would personally put that in the vision statement, but I wouldn't see an issue with saying that in our strategies, because I think one of the strategies we discussed last time is that we want to continue to try and have a rolling moratorium every 4 years. And, you know, I would be clear in the document. That's not because New Canaan doesn't want affordable housing. That's because we want to control the type and location of the affordable housing that we have. And so, you know, the only way we can do that is to continue to get the moratoriums. But I see that more as a strategy.
I would concur. I mean, I think it's a decent vision statement, and I'm sure some people could do some wordsmithing and stuff, but anyone have any major additions or deletions or modifications?
The only
I,
thing-
I might add something about sort of continual monitoring for changing situations. We talked about having oversight, so that'll tie into one of the strategies that we have, but as the population changes, we do talk about community conditions, but it also concurrent to looking out for changes and being able to respond to those as they come along.
This is Krista. I think, obviously I suggested using this. So obviously I think that the POCD is a great starting point for us and an easy place to start. I just wanted to throw out that in looking at some of the other 830J plans that were on the website that I shared after the last meeting, they ran the gamut from straight from the POCD, even more generic, like the town of whatever cares about affordable housing, period. Like it could be that generic. Or some places had actual goals, like the town of such and such wants to create 80 more units of affordable housing in the next 5 years. Real, as we used to call them, SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, that type of thing. Like I said, I'm fine with this, but I just wanted you guys to know the whole sort of realm that we could choose from.
If I would add one thing, I would add that we should encourage private market development of affordable housing consistent with the POCD and engage our community in the development of alternative housing strategies.
I think one other thing you could add, because we're discussing it, is that these goals should be achieved through a variety of strategies.
One thing I think we have to be very aware of, though, is that alternate strategies may or may not be counted toward a moratorium. Depending, they have to be deed restricted and all kinds of other conditions. As one of the reports I was reading indicated that there are below market rents in town, but only about half of those are occupied by people of lower income. It's somebody who's renting to their brother Bill, who lives in their, the other half of their house or something. And brother Bill makes $100,000, but he's getting a sweet deal. So those are not counted as affordable rents, even though the dollar sign puts them in that category. So it's how can we do both? It moves us toward a moratorium as well as developing affordable housing. Did that make sense to people?
Yeah, well, I think, Peggy, the last thing you said was key, is in going back to one of our basic propositions is our affordable housing strategy is partly how do we continue to meet the goals of 830G, but it also incorporates workforce, senior housing, other, an expansive definition of affordable housing.
Any other thoughts on a vision statement?
Can I just ask, Lynn, are we still scheduled to try to deliver this in the next week?
I just have it on my calendar. We are going to, yes, try and deliver it before the I think it's the 8th of April. So that gives us an extra week.
And do we know, has there been any coordination with our state legislative contingent on this?
I don't know. I can ask Westcog. Well, actually, no, I don't. We as a community have not coordinated with our state legislators. I can reach out to them.
What end, Art?
I mean, the simple thing here that I see, right, is that we're going to spend a lot of time worrying about 830G. If we don't at least make it particularly clear to our state legislators that a priority here is not overturning 830G, because I don't think that's going to happen, but protecting against incremental bracket creep. Some of the housing regulation that I am seeing in Hartford is really, really tough. And it would make 830G look like a cakewalk. And, you know, at a minimum, we should be clear to our legislative communities about what our priorities are. I don't know what they can do and not do. I agree totally that what we don't want to do is start with we think we should have local control, because that guarantees that we'll get punched in the head. You know, it just won't work. But we should at a minimum be really clear with our legislative community that we are going to do our best to try to provide affordable housing, but they should be doing their best to at least not make the rules more restrictive. I mean,
think
Kevin,
that-
you weren't on the last call, but I mean, one of the key problems we run into is that the way the qualified application plan is written, which is how credits are awarded, is particularly painful for our town and particularly helpful to Norwalk.
And why is that? Art?
The rules that get built into this favor denser communities, higher population, and lower income.
Right. I think the legislate, well, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I think Ryan Fazio and Tom O'Day are focused on this. I think on the other side, it's harder politically to publicly resist the sentiment, at least, to be tougher.
Yeah, I was only asking, had we coordinated? I'm not sure if we'll have any success. I just would hate for us to say, oh my God, we never explained all this really carefully to each person who might be able to influence it. So.
Getting back to the question of land and parking lots and that kind of stuff. I mean, to me, the equity component is a small sliver, and I can see the town, you know, supplementing the affordable housing fund if necessary. But the cost of land is the real issue. And I'm not sure realistically parking lots are the answer when we still need parking lots. And the cost of decking is very expensive.
And what's scary on I can't remember what Earl Smith had proposed on the lumberyard. Does anyone remember the number of units that he had proposed on there?
By Avalon, you know, wanted probably 100 or more, just like what they have.
And you sit there and you think that if you were to trade, you know, the lumberyard and you were to get tiered parking and a deck underneath, you get 1 4-year moratorium.
That's
If
really,
affordable.
yeah, and that's the point. I mean, you know, you want to do a couple dense developments, and the problem with the lumberyard too, it would loom over everything downtown. You can't make that low profile.
Good architecture is about piece of cake.
It might look that way from Elm Street. It ain't gonna look that way from Pine Street.
Kevin, is there just trying to think under labor force availability and how to move stuff along, you know, not for this application, but there's some things that probably need to be done in land inventory, in feasibilities, a couple of feasibility study things that is unlikely to be able to be done by a volunteer housing authority. And maybe I'm wrong under that, but
You mean inventorying the available land?
Well, inventory of available land, taking a look at the feasibility of a couple of, for any of these things, they all require some work, and they require, luckily we now have some money to hire some people if we need to on a consulting basis, if there's any people out there.
Well, we sort of already done that at our expense, looking for 2.5 acres for a police department. Of the hundreds of acres the town owns, we can't find 2.5 acres for a police department.
Well, I'm thinking about something like if you were to say, okay, let's take a look at Talmadge Hill and say over in the Talmadge Hill area, the Talmadge Hill parking lots or anything like that, we'd have to run sewer out there, we'd have to run water out there, we'd have to figure out what to do, but that's not a simple process. And I don't know whether or not that falls under housing authority to be the seed money to see if that's a feasible type site, or is that something that Lynn gets a part-time assistant to help on under P and Z, or do we create a new
Are you
housing?
talking about the parking lots or the land that's there, the 6.25 acres is mostly wetlands?
I'm just throwing out that I'm using that as an example, and whatever other pieces we find.
Well, but being on the other side of the parkway, the only option is to connect it into the Darien Stanford system. And it's all running downhill, so I suppose that's feasible. But again, I'd be reluctant to talk about giving up community parking lots.
I'm reluctant too, but
Okay.
start running out of land.
We are, well, yeah. It's a conundrum.
You're on mute, Peggy.
Sorry, the dog was barking, so I muted myself. There was a project up in Meriden that I believe Westmount did, and they, in conjunction with the train station, that link between Hartford and New Haven, and they put in a decked parking lot as well as a mixed income housing, which is a good portion of it. I think it was like 20, maybe 20% affordable. And Rick, I went up there and looked at it years ago before we started working on Canaan Parish. And it was a modular parking deck that they brought in. It's precast concrete, and it was not nearly as costly as he anticipated at that point. I don't know what it would be right now with concrete the way it is, but it might be worth looking at. It's a very attractive project right in downtown Meriden. People can walk to the train station from there, but it also incorporates town train station parking as well as residential parking for their complex. And that kind of concept might be worth looking at for, for the train station, or if we had down at Talmadge Hill, if we had the water and sewer, which is
the other thing about that
Right.
location is the Merritt Parkway Conservancy is not interested in having large developers next to the Merritt Parkway. And they would fight development along the Merritt Parkway.
Look, if they're all racist, then they can go ahead and take that title on themselves and they can fight it.
No, but I think that they actually usually win. That's a national registered landmark or something.
I think though, an interesting question going back to the railroad lot is, potentially it is underutilized for a long period of time. So I get the point about the economics, and do you have to be at a certain number of units? I know Steve did a fair amount of work on that a couple of years ago. And, the question is, what could be feasible? I thought Steve's comments on, I get, you wouldn't call it an RFP, you would call it a study, but look at what potentially is feasible. That does not create a monstrosity.
Look, I mean, I think, look, 7, 8, 9 years ago, we tried to go ahead and use state money to do a study of the parking lot and decking it. And I have never, it was one of the most contentious meetings that I ever attended. Pitchforks and torches were out over the whole concept of just asking for free money to study it. But I think there right now might be a window where we could at least study and find out what's feasible, so we know whether or not, is this something worth, do we just put it away and say it's never going to happen? or at least know the conditions and terms under which something can happen.
You talking about the lumberyard or Talmadge Hill both?
I mean, I'd say both, but the lumberyard in particular, that this might be one of the few times when you're even allowed to look at the opportunity to do something there. Because again, that was a real ugly meeting when we were talking about even studying it
I
before.
remember it well.
Yeah.
Although Chris Hussey is actually the one who at the time said we can never go back to the lumberyard, but now she's saying we had to at least look at it. So I'm concerned about the loom factor.
Look, it would not be easy to do anything on the lumberyard, but I mean, this is one opportunity now and again. It's probably not for this meeting today, but now is an opportunity where we might be able to at least study it and then know what we could possibly do. So our grandchildren would have something worthwhile to actually work with when we get around to it.
Right. I think we'll perhaps look into that.
I think like what Steve was talking about with the, I mean, a big stretch of asphalt in the middle of downtown is not what most people hopefully take away when they think about New Canaan, but it is a pretty prominent visual aspect, from Elm Street over there. So it has potential to do an interesting multi-use, landscape area that would illuminate the loom factor and a somewhat attractive parking deck. So
what else do we have to do for our submission that's due very soon?
I think the one thing we need to add is a laundry list of things that we think we should be doing, including the specifics we all talked about last meeting. An active inventory, review of this with town management, making the public available or make us available as a group to inform and get input from the public, discussion at appropriate land use and committees of the need to produce housing and to be aware of the constraints and restrictions, and an ongoing process for reviewing those items so that we are constantly improving the capacity of a variety of people to live in New Canaan, with a subtext that says, and by the way, we care a lot about compliance with state regulation as well.
Now, what wasn't a fair amount of that written up already in notes? It seems to me, and I'm the one who did not do a lot of editing. I've been caught up with my P&Z job. I've been working on some other things, but I think you guys put a lot of meat into place, and it seems like really all it needs to be is go from bullet points to prose potentially. But I mean, how far from a content perspective, in terms of meeting those outline objectives of, here's broadly speaking what our strategy is going to be.
I mean, I think Krista's email to Lynn was pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, in terms of what I put together, I think we have a lot to go on. Obviously we probably need to meet one more time and refine it, and probably specifically give Lynn comments on exact wording that will go in the plan, because it just seems like the right thing to do.
One of the programs I was wondering about was, we've been talking about, I think pretty exclusively rental properties. And I'm wondering whether the home project at the state level is something that we could look at for affordable owner properties, and maybe partnering with nonprofits, whether it's something like with Habitat for Humanity or something that would have and be able to bring in financing there that would be kept in, and because I noticed that I think there were like 7 or 11 units of under the home program that are considered affordable and trackable at the state level. So to not necessarily to the exclusion of just rental properties, but also look at potentially smaller home ownership. To look at encouraging developers to do that as well.
I've never understood how the affordable works on the ownership side of things, but that's my fault, not anyone else's.
There's virtually no affordable ownership anywhere in the Northeast. There's a lot of affordable ownership elsewhere. But in the Northeast, the vast majority of affordable stock is leased, and it is credit supported, and it is also supported by vouchers or a variety of other programs. So when we actually look at the marketplace that we're dealing with here, the most successful relevant model is probably what they did in Stamford, where they hired private developers, put them up, created a separate entity, put it on the town city of Stamford payroll, told them go build some housing. And they went out, and they got credits, and they built housing.
Massachusetts has that 42B program or something that seems to work up there.
Yeah, but it's fundamentally the same. I can tell you in Massachusetts specifically, about 80% of the affordable housing in the whole state is in 5 towns. It's in Worcester. It is in Springfield. It is in Fall River. It's in Dorchester, it's in Jamaica Plain, and it's very condensed, and it's now in the South Street Seaport area, but all of it is also credit supported. There's some up in Lowell and Leominster, but it's the same thing. You get pockets of housing in adjacent areas, and then communities do build responsive housing unit by unit. In fact, I was on a mass housing investment committee call this morning on exactly that subject, because there's so much of it embedded in large development concepts. And it's the same thing as we have around here, where Norwalk and Stamford have a ton of housing, and they're in compliant positions.
So one thought I have on the homeownership aspect of affordable housing is, at least in the stuff I sent Lynn, and I think we talked about it a bit at the last meeting. I'm pretty sure, obviously I don't have the data to support this, but I'm pretty sure the town of New Canaan has what people call naturally occurring affordable housing. It doesn't get us anything towards 830G. It's not deed restricted, but it fills a need in the town. And some of that I'm sure is home ownership housing units as well as rental housing units. And that would be one of my recommendations as a strategy going forward, is to try to get a handle on how much we have, where we have it, and what we can or should be doing to protect it. Because even though it doesn't get us towards moratoriums, it does, like I said, fill a need, and I think is a critical piece of the housing puzzle, especially if the only other option we have is to keep building. I mean, if we already have some stuff on the ground that's providing housing. The other thing I was going to say about home ownership, and I don't know where the financing would come for this in New Canaan, but in previous places that I've worked, we administered a soft second mortgage program to help people get into homes, and those second mortgages were forgivable over a period of time if they maintain the home ownership. And but anyway, that was all funded with federal funding, and since we're not an entitlement community, that does not seem like an option here.
Question for Lynn. Lynn, how close do you think we are to having a product that can go through an additional edit and maybe be ready for prime time, at least for the initial submission? You're on mute, Lynn.
Sorry. I think we're actually pretty close. We just really need to flesh out the strategies. We've put in time to get the history down and sort of fine tune it. And Krista's done a huge amount of editing on it. And then I think that, and I mean, her organizing the strategies into the same sort of table that we had for the housing opportunity study in 2011. Actually, now we just have to create narratives to match the strategies. So we're pretty close. Sorry.
So in your estimation, what needs to happen next?
I think, well, so we could do, I would suggest we meet one more time and then, you know, bring back a more edited version for comments from this group. And then we probably need to get it ready for to make sure that this group is okay with it and get it ready for putting it on our website and letting the public comment on it. And we probably need to host, as was suggested last month, maybe one Zoom meeting in the community just to see if there's any feedback or comments. And then the final step would be to, once we get feedback, to bring it to the Board of Selectmen to have them adopt it, and it would go in the final plan from Westcog.
But that's not, is that the April 8th submission or is that the final submission?
That's the final. So I just laid out the whole timeline. Yeah.
Okay.
So then what do we have to do by April 8th? We have to have a draft completed that we could go to public comment on?
Yeah. That we could put, yeah. I mean, if we can
And
get
so
done.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, finish your thought.
I was just gonna say that what I think would be useful, but obviously it's up to the group, is that when we meet, before we meet next time, we circulate, you know, a fairly complete draft to this group so that we can really have substantive comments about what we keep in, what goes out, you know, we don't like the way this comes across, we need to word this differently, that type of thing. Because yeah, I just think it's a better idea to do that before we go public with it.
How and in what format should we get something out to the public under survey, and or how much time do we need to put up for a public notice for participation? And I know we meet for participation formally, but we need to do more than that to keep people, to make people feel they had time to do something.
It'll go, well, so that's two questions. So it needs to go out for public comment for 30 days. So we'd have to put it up and allow it up to be up for 30 days for public comment. We could do a public session in the middle of that public comment period to kind of give us a bigger leeway, because that would give us a few more weeks to get people involved and offer thoughts. Probably, I would suggest probably a public comment session in the middle of April. Probably after spring break for schools.
So April 8th is the date that we have to start the 30-day public comment period.
Yeah, we can start it before that if we want. That was a tentative date that I put in
Okay,
there.
no, I'm just trying to figure out what April 8th was exactly.
Yeah, so I was hoping to get it out that week at the latest, because that would give us a comment period through the first week of May.
Okay, so I would like to see, I mean, who knows how reasonable it is, but if, you know, we'd need a full draft that we've as a group vetted by April 8th. And I'd also like to have put together, you know, whatever online survey we think we want to put out there, and have this group have vetted that as well, so that by, you know, on April 8th, we're ready to go with both a draft and the survey, and then, you know, have the public meeting somewhere thereafter. April 8th also conveniently works with me right before I have to go on spring break. So if you did it in the middle of spring break, I would be talking a different game.
I thought that the comments that were put together in the report give us a solid grounding to move forward. It's not going to change anything that we all have to do, but at least if we put that out there and engage the community, we'll start to move forward.
I think too, the survey questions that I read for the different towns, when you sent out the planning document, Krista, they were pretty generic and basically not so much what do you think about this, but more like where do you see yourself as far as housing? Where are you and where do you anticipate living? And I think that is probably a better approach for us to take, because of the document will have the public comment, but then it's basically sort of bringing it home a little bit from them, as opposed to responding to the survey for what they think should be done.
Okay, so you're saying the survey should be assessing the needs for different types of housing as opposed to giving us feedback on the strategies we've put together.
I think so, because I think that'll give us data points, and then the public comments will give us the feedback on what we suggest, what's in the proposal.
Okay, that works for me.
Because I think otherwise it becomes so unleashed in a survey if it becomes wide open that way.
Well, actually, looking at it that way might actually provide the specific different types of housing that New Canaan residents are looking for.
You know, it seemed like a lot of the towns use the same survey or the same types of questions,
Right.
and the same format. So I think we could probably piggyback on some of those. And they were developed, I believe, by Plan Metrics for some of them.
So then with the results, I'm just thinking through like what we do with the results. Would the results of the survey be included in our written document? Like, are they part of the sort of here's what our needs are section? Or is it just background information for going forward?
I would imagine that, you know, it's hard to tell what a survey is going to tell you, but I would imagine that we could put it as an appendix and make some comment in there reflecting how it impinges on what are some of our strategies and what our objectives are with the strategies.
Okay.
I'd say something that would be a resource to us in making our decisions and recommendation, and then it would be available. We would choose whether or not we made it available to whoever wanted to look it up and see it.
Yeah, I just worry about doing the survey. If this is how we're using it, I worry about doing it after we've written our strategies. You know, I mean, I don't think we're going to be that far off, but what if we write all these strategies and then the survey tells us something completely different?
Well, then we tell them that they're wrong.
Obviously.
Or we can say we plan to do a survey. I mean, a survey can be, you know, there's a lot of time thinking that needs to go into a survey to make it valid, and we're really against the gun with the deadline. And so it's a question of maybe one of our strategies is to try to get a good handle from the community, and part of that community involvement going forward, that dialogue that we'll have with what the needs are for housing and affordable housing in the town.
Well, because the other piece
Yeah,
I see of the survey, I mean, it's sort of a not as obvious piece, but I mean, we talked last week about the need for education. And I think anytime you ask somebody to sit down and answer a series of questions about housing needs in the town, the strategies to address them, even if, you know, the information they give us is not as useful as it could be, they've had to then now process this. And I think that creates a certain level of education that has value.
I agree with you. I mean, I saw the signs in town today. It says affordable housing, yes. You know, overdevelopment, no. So what do you mean, yes? What do you mean by that? So it's their turn to answer.
right?
How would we put the survey out there, so to speak? We do a press release saying there's a survey out there, go to www. whatever. How's it get put out there?
I mean, yes, my thought is it would have to be on the town website somewhere. How that actually comes to be, I have no idea.
Kevin, when we've done them before, how did we do it?
I'm a little confused. Who's going to answer the survey as to what their needs are?
The public.
Town residents.
Our objective was to make available to the community information about housing so that people will have some understanding of the issues, but also to get input. So that to the extent that we ever do go to finance or Board of Selectmen for funding, that the town doesn't say, well, we've never heard about this or we hate it, right? At some point, people may or may not be interested, but at some point, the complexity of these issues is so high. And you could see even the discourse in the papers right now, people don't understand these concepts. We should make it plausible for them to have their hands wrapped around this. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, I agree. That's why, I mean, the environment couldn't be hotter in terms of people understanding affordable housing issues.
Yeah.
But it does raise the question, and Kevin, maybe a question to you, because I think before we have done surveys, and the question I'm asking myself is I think a public meeting, a public session, I'm willing to bet will be, obviously with the right PR, will be well attended. I'm asking myself how you bring eyeballs into a survey. And Kevin, my question for you is, I know that we've done this before. So, what does it take to get eyeballs into a survey? Because I'm forgetting which one we did, but I remember it was a fair amount of work.
Well, we can do a survey monkey, email it to people. But doing a survey like we did with the community survey 22 months ago, or whatever it was,
Right. That's what I'm thinking of.
required quite a bit of preparation and expense.
Yeah.
And we could call that survey company and ask them if they've even done an affordable housing survey for anybody. Again, I'm asking the general public their views on affordable housing. It's sort of like asking 98% of the people something they don't need, and would say, I'm all in favor of solving the problem, but they won't know much more than that.
The surveys, Krista sent out the Planning Association guidelines for the Connecticut chapter, and the towns that had responded, several of them sounded like they used the same survey, whether it was a boilerplate or shared. And if you look at those, they're fairly generic and fairly individual, as opposed to sort of philosophically, what do you think we ought to do about affordable housing, which is a big issue. This is more sort of where you're living now, where you were living, what you anticipate for the future. Will you be here? Will you not be here? Do you anticipate being able to afford to live here when you retire, or in 10 years or 20 years? And they're sort of, they're more, I guess, separated from the bigger issue of what does New Canaan need to do about affordable housing. And so if you look at those surveys, it's a bit different than I think what we're thinking it could be, as opposed to what these surveys are. And
Well, we've done the senior housing surveys. Jim Lisher's done the senior housing survey. So but to me, by our nature, the demographics suggest people who are here can afford to be here. And it's the marginal folks that we're trying to establish affordable housing for, because they don't come in the first instance because they can't find affordable housing.
But up to Kevin, one thing I will point out, we talked about this in our first meeting, is again, our definition for what we're trying to accomplish here is not just affordable housing as defined by the state of Connecticut, but also, a broader definition, including senior housing, including workforce housing. But look, the practical question I'm asking is, for example, on planning and zoning, we go through the plan of conservation and development process. And what happens is we conduct a series of public sessions, and maybe not early on, but at some point we put content out there. I guess what I believe we put content out there, we will get a good outturn of people commenting on, that draft. Now it tends to be people who are more up on the issue and perhaps have, more of an axe in the situation, but we will get a good turnout there. The question I'm asking about, pushing out a public survey is I'm not sure, you have to do some PR, you have to work at it. And, Kevin, I couldn't remember, but it was, the study a couple of years ago, as you pointed out, and, there was a fair amount of work put into that.
Yeah, it's hard to do in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Yep. Although I was kind of impressed by Steve Kleppen's attitude that they don't really plan to file their plan on time.
Yeah.
Don't have to.
Huh?
They're already over 10%.
Yeah, but
So
is that
they're
actually,
not-
is that our mandate? Is that our mandate that if we don't, Lynn, if we don't file on time, what's the
No one knows what the consequences are, what the state's enforcement's going to be to get it. But Peggy's correct in that Norwalk is already over 10%. They're at 13%. So there's nothing to fear. They're not going to get a rash of 830G applications, or the state's not going to go, I don't know, publicly deride them or whatever they're going to do. They're already accomplishing the goals that the state and 830G want you to accomplish in creating affordable housing.
Years ago, I took it out of my apartment.
Okay, well, Lynn, so what do we need to do?
So I think we just established that the final steps are really to finish putting together the data and in a readable and complete format, and to circulate it. And then we should meet after that to confirm that everyone's in agreement. So I guess I won't set a date for the next meeting right now, and try and get this out to everyone. I mean, we can set a date for next week, hypothetically, if you guys want to put something on the calendar, but it sounds like we just need to finish putting it together and circulating, get thoughts and comments. Am I correct in the read of that?
I think you're making substantial progress towards something we need to do. And I think we should set another date, even if it's 10 days forward, because that'll give us, if you send us a marked up copy, we'll all send you back individual comments. I mean,
Okay.
what you guys did over the last week, particularly combined with the notes that Scott sent in, right, provide a really good representation of what we discussed.
So
How long does everybody want to, what time frame does everyone need to make comments on something? Can you turn it around in 3 days, 5 days, a week? How long do you guys want to be able to comment before we meet again?
For me, I need the weekend.
Yeah.
So you get it to me before a weekend, I can read it over a weekend.
Okay.
So
It
do we
only
want to tentatively say that we want to meet next Monday on the 28th?
No, because
Yeah.
remember, we have planning and zoning tomorrow night, right? And, I would recommend, right, the staff's going to be busy doing stuff. How are you going to be able to prepare it and get it out and get it to a weekend, right? My thought would be we go 2 weeks forward, because that gives you an opportunity to actually do it, Lynn, without killing yourself. And it gives us a time to read, comment, and respond.
Okay, so you want to set a meeting for April 4th?
Is that enough time to get it out to the public by that Friday?
You could, I mean,
we shouldn't overly obsess on the public component, right? I think we're going to say that we would like to get public input, but we are not going to, and I'm cognizant of what Kevin just said, we're not going to, even if we all killed ourselves, be able to get meaningful public input in time to respond to our Westcog goal here, right? So I think that we should, as a group, concur perhaps that what we want to do is get something in, get the paper in, try and decide later on how we get public input. But if we don't, at least we meet the thesis test.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's just a draft, right? Right, Lynn?
Right now, it's just a draft, yeah.
No. The April 8th submission is a draft.
It is a draft, yes. It's not final until after we leave it open for public comment.
Right.
And do we need to get on the selectmen's schedule for
We
approval
need to,
and submission?
the selectmen's schedule would be a May meeting of the Board of Selectmen.
So
Probably
that,
their
Peggy,
second
that's
meeting.
only for the final, right?
Yeah.
Right, Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, so if we had a solid draft to everybody by April 1st, or maybe even March 31st for an April 4th meeting, would that work for most people? So the Thursday or Friday before that Monday meeting is what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So then we could tentatively put on the calendar a Monday, April 4th meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, 6 p.m. 6 p.m. again, we think,
Yes.
maybe?
Okay. Okay, Lynn, we good to go?
We are good to go. Do we want to adjourn? I'm sorry, Art, did you want to say something?
That was a thank you.
Oh,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
okay,
I'll see some of you tomorrow.
okay.
Good,
Good
thanks,
night,
guys.
everybody.
Good night, thank you.
Bye-bye all.